I published the first top 10 tabletop arcade gaming toys video all the way back in 2022. And at the time, it was my intention to make that a yearly updated video. We'll look at what's the top 10 as of 2023 and 2024. And in fact, I was prepping a video in late 2023 when I realized there was a real dearth of tabletop arcade gaming toys, by which I mean Basic Fun had basically left the market, Super Impulse pretty much left the market, stopped making them, and My Arcade had slowed down quite a bit in 2022, 2023, and so there wasn't that much to do. However, here we are in 2025, and we know later in the year there's a influx, a deluge of new stuff coming. So before those start hitting the shelves this year, I felt like it was a good time to update my top 10 arcade gaming toys. That's what I'm gonna do in this video. Hey there, welcome back to Gen X Grown Up. I'm John, and I am a Gen X Grown Up. Thank you for taking the time to check out this video. If you happen to see that video from years ago, you may see a few repeats here. In fact, I started there as a baseline because these are my top favorite arcade toys, regardless of when they came out, that I think are worth taking a look at, even still now in 2025, and ahead of, as I said, the influx of things coming late in 2025. Now, just like with last time, I'm sticking to the same 3 rules. In order to be on this list, number 1, it has to be something that I have reviewed here on the channel. There are certainly arcade gaming toys that exist and I just haven't been aware of them, and maybe they would make my top 10 if I knew about them, but I can only base it on what I know and what I've seen, so I think that's pretty obvious. Second, it must be an arcade cabinet toy, by which I mean handhelds don't fit, pocket players don't fit, consoles don't fit. It has to be in the shape of an arcade gaming cabinet. That's the toy that I like collecting the most, and that's what this video is about. And finally, it must come in for $50 or less MSRP. Now, some of these have increased in price over the years, and some of them, of course, are no longer being manufactured, and it's more expensive on the aftermarket, so I can't help that. I'm going based on when they were released, and so there might be some fudge factor, like maybe some of these cost $55 or $60 now, but at the time of their initial release, everything in my list retailed for $50. So those are my rules, and we're going to get started with number 10. But first, I want to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Aura. You watch the news, so you know there have been a number of high-profile data breaches recently. Big online companies like Dell, United Health, and Ticketmaster have suffered breaches that have compromised the data of hundreds of millions of users. Most alarmingly, a few months back, National Public Data announced a major breach that could impact every American, with over 2.9 billion records exposed, including names, addresses, dates of birth, and social security numbers. And we know hackers have posted all of this info on the web for free, so if you haven't been taking your online data seriously, now's the time to change that. You can feel secure if you use Aura, today's sponsor. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records to alert you about potential identity theft. They also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance in case the worst happens. Plus, Aura keeps you safe online with real-time alerts for data breaches, a VPN for secure browsing, data broker opt-out, a password manager, and more. Don't leave your family vulnerable to data breaches. Just go to aura.com/GXG and try 2 weeks for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Here we go then, getting the ball rolling, starting with my number 10 pick. And while these other manufacturers have kind of stepped back and stopped putting out new material, you might think that it's going to be all My Arcade products, because that's who's really in the game at this sub $50 market, but they don't have a corner on the market. There are still some products that came out years ago that are making my list. And the first one is Fix-It Felix Jr. Now, Fix-It Felix Jr. is, of course, not a real arcade game. It was invented by Disney for the film Wreck-It Ralph. But if you have ever played a version of Fix-It Felix Jr., you will see, much like many independent games that are out these days from studios like Pixel Games that do things like Donut Dodo, doing things in the spirit of classic arcade games, Fix-It Felix Jr. feels like that sort of arcade game. And I was delighted as a fan of Wreck-It Ralph to see that Basic Fun manifest that cabinet that never existed into a cabinet that you could own. And it's a pretty good version of the game as well. It's very playable, it's a lot of fun, and when it released, it was only $25. Now these days, probably a little more expensive, but I'm sure still under 50 you could score one. So that'll get us going at the start of our ranking list. Okay, moving on then to number 9. Now, I'm not a fan of NES ROMs in tabletop arcade cabinets. That's well established if you've watched any of my videos, but there is one that made my list because it stands out as being a pretty good NES ROM, even though it still isn't as good as the arcade version, and that is the My Arcade release of Rolling Thunder. Now, unlike many fixed screen, single screen games like your Pac-Man and your Galaga, things like that, Rolling Thunder is a scrolling adventure, multi-level through this compound, trying to rescue the damsel in distress from the evil corporation that has taken her hostage. Look, a variety of enemies, a variety of things to do, and ammunition and weapon pickups and that sort of thing. And it's just something we didn't see a lot of in these early arcade toys. And despite the fact that it isn't the arcade ROM, so it's missing the great music and some of the detail in the sprites, Rolling Thunder on the NES was still pretty good, and putting it in a cabinet like this, though I'm not a fan of NES ROMs in cabinets, it still makes number 9 on my list. Moving right along into number 8, and this is my second pick from Basic Fun, despite the fact they've largely been out of the market for the last couple of years. I mean, they like reissued a Pac-Man and a Tetris, but otherwise, like nothing new that they've produced. And maybe they're done, I don't know. But with the retro games market, you think they'd want to hop back in. But they also tended to put out NES ROMs for a while on their machines. But when they didn't do that, they kind of wrote their own versions or had somebody write them. They ended up putting out some pretty good stuff. Last year, their Pac-Man made my 10 list. It's not on the list this year, spoiler alert, but one that was on the list last year and sticks is this Dig Dug. This is the number, was it 13, if you were keeping track of the numbers of the Basic Fun releases. Now, this was not the NES ROM, nor was the arcade ROM, but it's surprisingly faithful to the arcade version. And in fact, when I first saw it in the store, I mistakenly thought it was the arcade ROM. And even still today, this is the best version of Dig Dug that would ever qualify for this top 10 list. It's under $50, it's an arcade toy, and frankly, no one has released anything better for Dig Dug since. We're still waiting. We'd like to get an arcade ROM if we could. Well, keep holding our breath. Well, speaking of arcade ROMs, and the cruel irony here is my number 7 pick is something that is an arcade ROM, and yet many people were disappointed because they were more familiar with the NES ROM. Not me, I was happy. It's this Contra. Now, this was back when My Arcade was doing their premium line. There were just a few in that line, and a couple of them have made this list. And this is the arcade version of Contra. It has a nice vertical screen that matches what Contra would be, and it has all the good and bad that come with being a genuine version of Contra. By which I mean, if you love the NES version, this ain't it. If you love the arcade version, well, great. Also, if you're used to being able to infinitely continue and keep playing, that's not how the arcade Contra worked. You got a few continues and then you had to stop and start over. That was a money-making mechanism that Contra baked in so that rather than finish the game after several continues, you had to restart the game and pump in quarters all over again. Now, you might argue, hey, I paid for this machine, I should be able to continue all I want, but this is accurate. And because this My Arcade Premium Edition cabinet delivered on what it is that I wanted, those arcade ROMs of my classic games, that's how it made my list at number 7. Okay, let's move along then to number 6. My number 6 pick is a little odd in that it's two machines because I can't wholeheartedly recommend one over the other. They both have their pluses and minuses. And though it wasn't on my list the last time around, Ms. Pac-Man has now made my list. Now, My Arcade released a few years ago the regular micro player, and then just last year they put out this joystick player. They both have their pros and cons. The joystick player has that nice big joystick. It has the sped up version of Ms. Pac-Man. It can save your high scores, but it also missed the mark on a few of the sound effects that were better on the micro player. So it really comes down to your preference. If you're a fan of Ms. Pac-Man, and who isn't, and you would like to add one of these, a Ms. Pac-Man, to your collection, but you're not sure which one is right for you, they do have their differences, as I said. So if you'd like to compare them, I did do a special video comparing the two. I'll put a link to that up in the corner. So one of them is probably right for you if you're a Ms. Pac-Man fan. Choose the one that's right for you. And again, both under $50, easily obtainable today still. All right, let's move along then to number 5. Now that we're in the top half of my top 10 list, this is where things really got shaken up from the last time I did this back in 2022. A lot of the ones we've talked about already were on my list last time around, but you probably saw some that are gone now, and some that were in the top slot aren't there anymore. But one that did survive all the way to 2025 is this Premium Edition Street Fighter II from My Arcade. Now, if my memory serves me well, this came out in late 2020. We were in the midst of a global pandemic, and there were no new arcade toys coming out, but this had been delayed from 2019, and when it did start hitting store shelves in, I don't know, September or October, I was driving around Walmart's trying to find it, and once I got it, I wasn't disappointed. Was it perfect? Look, we review tons of arcade toys, and there's no perfect toy, but this had the arcade ROM, it had 2 different games in it, it had a nice full-size stick, it had nice medium-size, comparable buttons, all 6 buttons that you need. There were criticisms about it, there was some logic in the buttons, there was kind of a floppy joystick. My Arcade released an updated version of that, in fact, and addressed those issues, fixed the button logic, made the joystick a little more rigid. Now, all of that speaks to My Arcade listening to customer feedback and fixing problems in releases that they have, which is admirable. But honestly, even when the joystick logic was present and the joystick was floppier than some people would like, I really enjoyed this product. I enjoyed it even more later when they updated it. Now again, I think maybe these days, this is one of those that might run $60 instead of $50, but when it came out, it was $49.99, and I was impressed with what they did after the history at that time of all the NES ROMs. That's when Contra came along in that same line. So that'll get us started at the top half of our list, number 5. Let's move along then to probably a surprising number 4. And my number 4 pick is from one of those companies that seemingly has dropped off the face of the planet, certainly as far as making arcade toys. They're still in business, but not making the toys that we enjoy. And that's Super Impulse New Rally X. Now, you might be surprised to see this little guy in my number 4 spot, but there are a few reasons for that. It doesn't just come down to how accurate it is. It doesn't just come down to how well it's executed. Sometimes it comes down to how much you enjoy the game and how underrepresented it was until this thing came out. Now, these little Super Impulse toys are keychains, is what they're advertised as. I ripped the keychains off. But they are all rewrites of the game designed to work in this super low resolution. And this one has good sounds. The reproduction of New Rally X on here is really good, and I found myself playing this over and over. This was one of the few that did come out in 2023 that could have made my list, and in fact was on my early list before I canceled the other video due to lack of new products coming out. But over time, like so many of these on my top 10, and especially in my top 5, this continues to get play for me. It's sitting on the shelf and I go, oh, how about a little game of New Rally X? And I'll grab it and I'll play it because it's just really, you don't see it on any other handhelds, and it hasn't hit any other tabletops in this price range, certainly. Now, when these came out, 20 bucks, probably get it for under 50 still. I think some of these have crazy prices. Rally X isn't one of them, so that's my number 4 pick. Might surprise you, but kind of surprised me too. All right, moving along then to number 3. I had mentioned earlier that the basic fun Pac-Man is no longer on my top 10, that number 14 that did such a good job, because it's been replaced by something else, and it might not be such a surprise. It's replaced by this My Arcade Pac-Man joystick player that came out just last year. Now, over the micro players, the joystick players offer a lot that you didn't have before. You have the full-size ball-top joystick you would expect to have on Pac-Man. There are 2 versions of Pac-Man here, the regular and the speed-up chip version. Plus, these new joystick players save your high score, something that wasn't happening on a lot of other tabletop arcade toys up until My Arcade finally came around in 2024 and started adding it. And this is, I think, the second time I've said this in this video already, but there are no perfect arcade tabletop toys in this price range, but this Pac-Man does a lot moving toward in the right direction. It's still not the unaltered arcade ROM. There's still some sound issues. You can tell the logic for the ghost is not 100% accurate, so depending upon your tolerance for that sort of deviation from the original, maybe a Pac-Man in this price range isn't right for you. But if that doesn't bother you and you enjoy playing Pac-Man as close as you can get in this price range, I think this Pac-Man joystick player from 2024 is a really nice addition to the lineup. Okay, moving along then to number 2. The number 2 on my list this time around was the number 1 last time, but something has taken its spot. But that doesn't take anything away from this My Arcade Premium Edition Space Invaders. Now, You might notice a trend, a lot of, in fact, I think there were 3 premium edition products from My Arcade, and all 3 of them continue to exist on my list of the top 10 because they're just that much better. With so much more stuff coming out this year from My Arcade, who knows what that's going to do to shake up this list for me. But for now, this Space Invaders came out of left field and blew me away with what it did. Not only does it have an arcade ROM of Space Invaders in it, but it also reproduces that Pepper's Ghost illusion where there's depth to the game. And the game is actually reflected up on a mirror and you can see the moonscape behind the invaders. And it gives you that feeling that you got in the arcade of looking down into the machine, seeing some depth, seeing some dimension. It's something that's missing from so many versions of Space Invaders, and you just can't do it without special engineering, and My Arcade went out of their way for this Space Invaders to make it what is still one of my favorite all-time tabletop arcade toys under $50. Now this is another one that I think has gone up in recent years. I think it might be 60 or so if you still want to pick it up. They're still making them because it's still that good. But it was $50 at the time of release, and so it's still on my list, and it's my number 2. So we're there. What is the number 1 on the list? You probably already know. When My Arcade first showed off their proposed pole position racing player at CES 2023, it had problems. The gear shift was upside down, the steering wheel was digital, it only had 1 game on it. We all complained. What did My Arcade do? Did they double down and dig their feet in? No. They delivered on everything that we observed. They brought us this pole position racing player. Full analog joystick, gear shift, gas pedal, brake pedal, saving high scores, pole position 1 and pole position 2, all of that is present on this 2024 pole position racing player. And these are the pole position arcade ROMs. You can play pole position like you remember it, with a steering wheel, with a gear shift. No compromises beyond the compromises that naturally come with miniaturization. You just don't have a full-size device. But as I reviewed this, I was continually impressed and surprised with all of the things that My Arcade did to make this racing player what we knew it could be, and not just what they thought they might want to produce. And that absolutely, for me, puts it in the number 1 position. Will it survive next time when I do one of these, post 2025, when I get to 2026 and there's another, dozen more products out there? I don't know. They had to work pretty hard to pass it up. I know Outrun is coming, so maybe that's going to give it a challenge. I don't know. Look, all of these products we've talked about, I have reviewed at one time or another. I will put links to all of those videos down in the description. Meanwhile, I'll throw a couple links here and here to some other recent videos I've done. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this one, though, and I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.